Excellent. All right, we are back again on the same day world. Podlayer team, doing what we do, tracking the Mojo phenomenon and sharing the methodology we use to do so and all the information we've gleaned. Right now we're doing track 2 voicing work, going over the main principles of Podlayer theory and how they all relate to each other in a seamless logical model. All right, so we are now in, for you guys, going for your L6, which is Mojo reading. All right, so Ben, we'll start off with you.
All right.
Real simple. What are physiological cues?
Oh crap! I have to get to the page. Okay. Like I scrolled all the way up to the Najez stuff. So like, I think we're
page
at like
78, I think, right?
Okay. All right, there we go. So we're not going to read the top section, or like the under the like the thing directly under chapter 4 Mojo reading.
The header.
Yeah,
page
right.
78.
No.
Okay.
Right.
So physiological cues are any physically observable motion, action, tension, or aesthetic quality, no matter how subtle or complex, that a person manifests with their physical body in any way. So is that the...
That's the answer.
Okay, so that's the only one for that piece. I haven't. I just read that straight from the book. So
take your time. Because that's a term we use constantly in our way of speaking is Podlayer. So that's one people probably often ask us, what are physiological cues? So you want to have a good answer to that.
They're cues. They're physiological. That's it.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah,
Name describe itself. All right.
It's like, thanks for that.
Okay. So physiological cues are physically observable actions, tensions, or just straight up qualities of a person's body that show up on their body in some way, no matter how subtle or complex that they are.
Good. Glenn?
Yeah, just one sec. It's also quite interesting how cues can they go from the from being like very like concrete to very like artistic and spiritual, but like it's still the same thing. Because like you can go like ultra concrete and say like the quality of this person, you know, this person's face, you know, that's effectively a cue that's related to Mojo, because the quality of their face is of course related to Mojo. So it's just interesting. Of course, generally for identifying Mojo, you want to have a nice blend of like art, of concrete to artistic and spiritual. If you focus too much on the concrete, typically it's gonna feel a little bit like it's gonna feel a little like sort of superficial in a way. Like you might mistake a person just because they have.
You can get lost in the weeds.
Yeah, lost in the weeds.
Because if you
like not
we can
to see the forest,
video, and every single like fraction of a second, right? 30 frames per second. We can actually take every 30th of a second and actually name a ton of concrete cues. So if you just stay focusing on that, you'll just be like overrun. You'll be in the weeds basically of details. But it does give a reassurance. Good, Glenn.
All right, so physiological cues are any sort of observable motion, action, tensioning, or aesthetic quality, no matter how nuanced or complex, that a person gives off with their physical body in any sort of way.
Got it. All right, next one.
And then on the other hand of going too much, like thinking, I guess, like being too much on the spiritual side, you can kind of like if you know just if you go too much into fifth gear, you might you need to like basically affirm in a concrete way that your visions of of the story is actually on the right stuff. You know, it's like is this really about Mojo, or is this something else that's moving me, you know, about their story? because it's like so high level that like there's so much. You get to the point where of low level cues, or low gear. It's more like you're looking at more detailed based, so more little things. But like high level, it's like there's all this other stuff besides the person's mojo that could perhaps make it more tricky. And as Mitchell mentioned in his email, like third gear is like in the middle, where it's like you're just tacitly observing just the distinct signals are really distinct about a person's mojo. But it's good to have like all the gears and levels. Sorry, go. You can go now.
I was just saying that. Yeah, with the fifth gear, it's sort of like you get swarmed by the overall qualia to such a degree that it becomes like I don't even know what to say. It's just like that's it, right? Whereas when you get too much into the details, the weeds, as it were, you'll have so much that you want to say, but it's sort of like you don't know where to even begin because there's so many little details, and it's just like never ending. So it's kind of both in an interesting way. It's hard to articulate.
Yeah. I find myself, I'll just say real quickly, move on, but I find that I usually tag in on one and then drift over to catch the other. More often than not, I start high, but I do both ways. For example, I tend to feel myself moved right away. Even before I aesthetically take them in, like a millisecond before that, I kind of just feel like an impression from them. Mm-hmm. And then that impression may lead me a place, high gear, and then I like to come down and make sure I'm not getting carried away with that impression. I make sure there's some concrete details that back up that high pattern one. Vice versa, sometimes I'll just see V. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what else to know about this human being, but that person has V. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's modulation, maybe it's momentum, maybe the logic, maybe the value space, but that person has V. Like, that's the one thing you're sure of, and then you kind of like rise up to find the larger patterns to see what their actual mojo is. So you need both.
Yeah, it really depends on the sample, I guess.
It does.
Whatever pops out first is like whatever pops out first, given your lens that particular moment, then you're like, yeah, I'm just going to take whatever I can get, kind of, in a way, right?
Exactly. And then try to pull on that thread the rest of the gears.
Yeah.
All right, so Glenn, you're going first here. In what ways do physiological cues manifest? How can this be broken down? What are the basic categories of this breakdown?
Right, so physiological cues manifest in everything a person does. However, it is helpful to break the entirety of it down into more manageable categories based on areas of the human body that emanate cues in distinct ways. The 10 primary areas focused on in Mojo reading are the eye zone, the cheek zone, the mouth zone, the voice, the head, the shoulders, the gesturing, the overall carriage, overall stance, posture, and their overall movement / their gait. So quite a bit there.
There's 10 that helps.
Yeah.
So we want to get all 10?
Yes, please. It's important.
All right, cool.
Because those of you get all the time. What are physiological cues? What are you reading? And you kind of just go bop, 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 bop. Even if you don't get the details, if you can just rattle off all that you're doing, you're like, oh, that is basically what humans do. Even if you don't know Mojo or people reading, if you rattle off the 10, that is a nice, complete inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Voices included in here, so it's not really an area of the human body, but rather the sound of a person. It's coming from inside their body, but it's like a auditory thing.
Yeah, it's area doesn't quite it's not the correct way to put it. I think it's sort of like any sort of like way in which the body can express itself in a way, like through the eyes, through the cheeks, the mouth, the head. They're all cues.
No, I think it's actually just a semantic thing, because I could just change it to vocal cords, and then it becomes an area. Boom, done. It is now an area.
Yep. Yeah, it's the only thing that really makes it distinct from the other ones is that you're not actually seeing it; you're actually hearing it.
Yeah, that's kind of like what I was thinking. Like the vocal cords, you can't see the vocal cords, but yeah, you can hear them and what they produce as far as like the voice box and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
because it never actually says like see necessarily. So
Of course, when we say like see the phenomenon, I mean we're generally referring to. I mean, primarily we're doing it visually, but
right.
Seeing in terms of like really like understanding it and reading the quality.
Yeah, areas, it can refer to like physical places, or
Right.
it can refer to sort of like conceptual areas
Exactly.
as well, right? So I think that's kind of like a good way to think of it. But usually, yeah, physiological cues, we tend to think of them in terms like physical, biological cues. But there are, and that tends to make you think, oh, that's V. That's sort of like what you're concrete looking at. But yeah, the voice is also a physiological area that can you can read.
Yep.
Yeah.
Heads and shoulders, knees and toes.
Whatever it takes.
We should make a song for that, like about the 10 primary areas.
Yeah.
They'll teach it in school one day.
Eyes, the cheeks, the mouth, and voice.
Mouth and voice. Mouth and voice.
Head and shoulders, gesturing, and overall carriage.
Some roll up more than others.
All right, I'm gonna try to attempt this. Okay, so when it comes to physiological cues and the way in which they manifest in a multitude of different ways, but it's good to kind of break them down into manageable chunks in order to sort of focus in on certain areas that you can basically focus on in order to sort of like categorize and understand in a more easier way, given the easily more digestible smaller chunks that make up physiological cues. So the areas that tend to be associated with reading physiological cues include the mouth zone, the eye zone, the cheek zone, the voice, the head, the shoulders, the gesturing, and the stance or the position of the body, as well as the overall movement of the body.
Good.
So did I get all 10 there?
I believe you did. Did you say? Look real quick. I think you did. You said carriage.
Yeah, I said carriage.
Bam, you got it. Nice. All right, Ben.
All right. I'm just gonna take a couple more seconds to look these over, and then I'll. I think it helps to like visualize all of these parts, because like you can sort of visualize a human form, and I think that helps to remember.
Yeah, the head is sort of like one area, but then it encapsulates many other parts in it. And then the head and the shoulders, they kind of like
head and shoulders, then like head, shoulders, gesturing. Then you think about like carriage. Then you think about like so.
yeah.
All right. All right, so the physiological cues can manifest in many ways, but it helps to break them down into manageable chunks based on all of the major parts of a person's body. So there are 10 basic categories of the human body as they relate to physiological cues, and that would be the mouth zone, the cheek zone, the eyes zone, the head zone, the voice zone, the gesturing zone, the carriage zone, the posture zone, and the movement zone.
You got it. Nice.
Nice.
All right, Glenn.
I said zone for all of them. Movement zone doesn't really. I mean, but I think it
actually does. No, actually, zone does work.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense because like your all of your body movements.
It does take up a zone, right? It is there is a zone to it, like or like an area. Area and zone is sort of like the same.
Yeah. Context.
And yeah, there are 10 primary areas or 10 primary zones, so it works.
All right. So, Glenn,
Ben is next.
What is the face zone? How does it relate to physiological cues? How does it relate to biological evolution?
All right, Ben.
No,
yeah.
Oh, who went?
I did it second last time. So
right.
Yeah. The term face zone refers to the combined areas of the eyes, cheeks, and mouth. The face zone is the area that humans give off the most physiological cues from. Also is the area that humans and most advanced mammalian life forms naturally focus their attention on the most when trying to understand another person.
Yeah, that's good because even like babies when they're very young, they're like they focus on like on like anything that has the shape of like a circle, but even more so like shapes of like faces. There's like a part of the brain that's like designed to be able to understand faces very, very well. It's like
and knows that that's where most of the information expression is coming from.
It's really interesting that people haven't have people caught on to the fact that humans just naturally qualitatively demand more attention from the environment. Like when you're I'm not sure if you've noticed this. I mean I'm sure you have actually, but when you're looking when any human is just looking in some random area in front of them and someone walks by, they're just naturally really drawn to them. It's just instinctually it's
they're trying to fill in their virtual village among other things, and so then over time as it gets fuller they start becoming more discerning of what they take in, and as people get older and older they tend to get more and more discerning on because they have less time, less energy to be doing things, so they go for more what they know they want. But early on you don't really know what you want, so you actually take in a lot of data just to get an initial data pool to work with to start finding out what your preferences are.
Yeah, but I mean when I say drawn, I mean your attention just is naturally focused on, I mean
I was referring to that as a larger principle, but also to that specific case is that you guys know from Mojo reading, it takes effort to try to figure out what you're looking at with a human. So what I was talking about is as people get older, then there is a difference in how much effort they're going to put out without there being a precursor that's looking like it's likely going to be fruitful.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
But for a young child, so I think this is well documented, not Mojo-wise, but in general, principle is documented in child education, at least cutting-edge stuff, is that they need to drink in a lot just to get a baseline of data, and then they start figuring out, I like this, I don't like this, and that begins the process of them being more discerning over intake.
Yeah, we're social creatures. We we pay attention to other humans and what they're doing. Yeah. If someone you walks by and they happen to look down on the floor, you'll feel a need to want to, or an urge to want to look to where they're looking as well, kind of to see oh, what's this human looking at? Yeah. Maybe that's going to be an important thing that I should probably be aware of as well, kind of thing.
Yeah, I just noticed that human creatures, human movement and animal movements are I think tend to be way more distracting than I mean distracting is a weird word, but it's sort of
it draws your attention more. Yeah.
Attention. Yeah, then there's this dichotomy you guys are talking about, which is curiosity over efficiency. So everything takes energy, and the question is, is it more curious to you, or is it becoming inefficient? So, for example, with people, there's kind of relating to both you guys are saying, is the child is going to be more likely to look at something because it's new. You don't know what it is. It could be good, it could be bad, but it's new. So then, how do you know? You keep watching, so that more prolonged attentiveness that children can have at staring at new things is because to them, it's doing new stuff. But for example, if we actually see someone do something on the side of our vision, we look over and they begin the motif of picking up a dropped item from the floor or something else like that. You've seen that motif a bunch of times already in your life. So more than likely your Nai, for example, for Nai is going to just naturally tug on you. Let's just go back into the simulator without watching this human go through the whole motif of picking up his thing and putting it back on his desk. We've seen that so many times. I don't need to see that again. But for a child, all these motifs that humans are doing, like a social angle, Glenn, it's all new. They've never seen opening a door for someone, being rude, being this, being that, hand the sugar clumsily, hand the sugar unclumsily. They've never seen all that. To us is like, okay, I've seen sugar pass the table a bit now. I don't need to track that. Like, yo, that's the greatest thing ever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's like when you're, I guess if you're like in New York City and there's like people like everywhere you go, it's like you're not really you're kind of going to phase everyone around you out because it's like they're, you know, you can't get anywhere without there being like
you'd be
freaking 20 people in front of you.
No. But for a child, they're actually already dealing with something of being overwhelmed, which is, from their position, a very young child, the newness of everything is actually the most overwhelming. So if they can just inhale and kind of reduce the unknownness, they'll start getting their bearings more. Once you actually have some idea of what you're doing, then that much information can actually lose your bearings of you knowing what you were doing. But a new child out of the womb doesn't really have that at all. Do you know what I mean? They have nothing except everything has meaning, which I don't know what it is.
That makes sense.
Right.
Which is cool, by the way. It's good to actually cultivate that state. It's Niji, we kind of are known for being good at that. Something everyone should kind of work on is when you look at a project or an activity, try to imagine what mindset would be best for this. That includes different characters, obviously, but also things like age. Like sometimes when I do activities, I like to pretend that I'm older than I am so I can like really wizard it. Other times, I like to pretend that I'm like me when I read comics as a kid. I kind of decide which vision I think would help me get this better. And it's good to actually have like, you know, a mature and a childlike way of looking at things.
You need to sort of like shape shift into that proper form.
Yeah. And then you can get the best look.
Yeah, it's funny. Just to throw like a quick little example out there, just real fast, because I know we have to do this next beat here. But like, I'm writing an essay, and I've never had to really write an essay like this one before, so I'm learning how to like find my voice as far as like what do I talk about, how do I bring it up? Because there's so many different ideas that I'm like, I can start it off this way, and I'm talking about this and that, but then, you know, like, and I'm like trying out all these different kinds of ways in which I can do it, and slowly it's kind of like shaping into something where it's like, this seems like I have something, you know, that's, you know, like it makes sense to me now, you know, but you kind of need to like play it out a little bit with your simulator.
For sure. Yeah, that's something that anyone can experience, but now you tend to be prone to that particular one, which is a long process of finding yourself. But once you find yourself, then you know how to write, you know how to talk, you know how to make decisions.
Yeah. Like, it's funny.
Once you get that,
you can sort of like use that for every new experience, kind of. But you just need to like go through the little bit of the frustration and the kind of like of the initial period where it's like, I don't know how to do this right, and then you just like, if I just keep at it, eventually it'll come, you know.
Yeah.
If you procrastinate and start doing other things, and it's sort of like in an attempt to sort of like avoid having to deal with that, then that can make it so that it'll just prolong the process even further. But if you just kind of get through it, then it makes it easier.
And quick, just so we have it, we kind of mentioned the process here. That's actually 1/3 of it, real fast. The first third is getting into a new form. You got to fight that sort of resistance and lethargy, what Glenn just said. Then the middle portion, you get to ride around in it. And when you're riding around, that's what I was alluding to, which is you basically are like, I'm Jack Nicholson at McDonald's. I'm Jack Nicholson with this person. I'm Jack Nicholson on the toilet. Like, once you like, I'm that person, then you can ride it in pretty much anything that character would be relevant to them. And then the third phase is that character, which is feeling really strong to drive around, it starts to get a little too tight. It's a little too small. It's not actually answering all the questions you want, and you have to molt. slough it off like an exoskeleton, a Mazu exoskeleton, and then begins again as you look for the next new form that will be ideal for this leg of your journey.
That is so true. You you put it all right there. Yeah, I was like following you exactly. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. But we should get back to it. But that was a cool talking point. Where are we? I lost a little bit of track.
The face zone.
Face zone. I think I'm working on that one.
Okay. Cool.
Shouldn't it also include the voice area too, Coach?
Yeah, I can see that.
Because I think like it makes sense because the voice is like a very powerful and notable cue when it comes to reading a person.
Yeah, it's interesting because the voice, like, it sort of corresponds with the mouth in a lot of ways. Like, you can read someone's lips, and you can in like the way if somebody speaks in a certain way, you can generally see the effect of that on a person's face.
Okay, so here's what I wrote. I just added a fragment on to the first sentence. I said the term face zone refers to the combined areas of the eyes, cheeks, and mouth, as well as the voice as far as where it emanates from.
Yeah, sounds cool.
Yeah. All right, cool. Updated.
All right, so the face zone refers to the eyes, the physiological cues that emanate from the eyes, cheeks, mouth, and voice, as far as being the mouth being where the voice emanates from. Let's see. Throughout all of the face is the evolved place that humans are primarily drawn to when they look at a person and give off the most physiological cues.
And that's true for most of your smarter mammals. All right.
Yes.
Glenn, have you done this beat?
No, I haven't.
Please.
All right. All right. The term face zone refers to the overall face as well as all the cues, all the different areas that are part of it, which includes the eyes, the cheeks, the mouth, as well as the voice as far as where it's emanating from. And this area is the face zone in general is an area where we humans, as well as most evolved, most advanced mammalian species, tend to focus on the most because it's the area that gives off the most amount of physiological cues and is therefore the primary area that we tend to focus on because of that.
All right. So next up, Glenn, what is qualia? What are qualiophiles? What are qualiophobes? How does pod layer theory fit into the qualia discussion? And how does the Mojo phenomenon relate to qualia?
All right. Qualiophiles, is that like like a file on qualia?
I didn't even make
just like audiophiles with qualiophiles.
It's kind of funny, just but this gets into this kind of like we make new words up. I didn't make those up. New words just sound funny, but those are actually new words that were already existent.
Oh, like so people actually there's actually people who call themselves qualiophiles.
Yeah, a lot of popular terms are new, and then there are some that are kind of like adjustments or specific uses of known words, and the other ones are actually just ones that are out there, and this is one of those. Our definition of qualia, qualiophile, qualiophobe, that's just the definition.
All right. So qualia is a term used in philosophy to describe various aspects of a given person's innate nature. Those who believe people have qualia, innate natures, inherent to themselves, are called qualiophiles. Those who do not believe in human qualia, such as those that adhere to the blank slate theory, are called qualiophobes. Qualia is most definitely a qualiophile theory, and moreover, it further extends the definition for qualia as applied to humans to account for the Mojo phenomenon discovery. In this context, Podler defines the term Mojo as the particular qualia or innate nature that is observable in any given human individual. And I think we can even expand further on qualia to include, like, everything has a qualia to it, right? Like the chair that you sit on.
In this context, I'm actually referring to humans because we were talking about human Mojo reading.
Yeah.
But just actually the definition of qualia actually just means anything's innate quality. Human, lump of coal, anything.
Like wood has a certain kind of qualia to it.
Exactly.
That you can interpret and understand. And quality, I think, is a very subjective experience as well, right? It kind of implies that because it's the object or whatever it is that you're.
That's getting into the tricky part about it. There is
Right.
the fact that it's subjective, but it is a given quality. For example, the way I'm expressing myself now, there is a way to it. Now, I may look at that and go, it looks like this to me. Other people may feel differently, but there is an actual answer. There is a quality.
There's an objective quality to it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but as far as like the infrared spectrum, like color, for example, we're able to interpret and understand color, but we're not able to see color in all the different ways that it comes out, like infrared and ultraviolet and that sort of stuff. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, though, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't have an effect. But the way in which we interpret it is different depending on, like snakes. They're able to read infrared, whereas we aren't. So that's pretty cool.
So I added a word in here just to be clarifying, because it is used in all philosophy. I added the word humanistic. So qualia is a term used in humanistic philosophy. So that one word helps kind of zone into the specific philosophic discussion. Because qualia is discussed in general, but also has a very heated discussion about human qualia.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we jump in.
So it would be correct to say qualia is a term that is used mainly in humanistic philosophy.
No, I would just say is used in humanistic philosophy, because it's used in general philosophy, like you said, wood and things like that. But then there is a kind of like specialty branch of it that gets a lot of action, which is applying it to humans.
When I've heard about in philosophy, I've heard about more in terms of more like basic sensory stuff, like the more basic concrete sensory stuff, like whether something, the quality of the smell of something. I haven't heard of it in the humanistic end, but I haven't done a whole lot of studying philosophy, so I haven't gone into more specialized areas of philosophy or anything.
If you look up
mostly just like introductory level courses.
Gotcha. If you look up like say just on Wiki or something like that about qualia, they'll usually talk a bit about qualia in general, like you're talking about and where that came from, and then there's also then usually a noticeable thing about how it relates to people, because that's where it gets a little more heated and interesting, because that gets into what does it mean to be a human.
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost seems like, it seems like a really obvious concept, like now that, like,
you would think
qualia is quantifiable and it's scientific, but people seem to think that that things like color are just like subjective, like experiences. Like it's like it didn't come from anything. You know what I mean? Like other than what we us interpreting something is part of objective reality. Like that there's something that caused that to happen. Like there's something, you know what I mean?
Glenn dropped off, but I'll just say that there is, I think, an element of qualia that may bother people, and they may not even know it consciously. But the debate of determinism immediately comes over the horizon when you start talking about qualia. Because if you say that has the qualia of a violin, you've implied something. That will always be playing music from a violin. Once you actually say it's not an instrument, it's a violin, right? You're qualifying it. You're saying it has the qualia, not just of any instrument, but of a violin. You are saying kind of what its trajectory is. So Glenn, we move on here quickly, but I'll just say one of the reasons why the qualia discussion, when it gets to humans, starts to make things weird is because of determinism. Are you familiar with that? Basically, the idea that everything that you're going to do was already determined by
your genes and stuff like that.
Your genes, exactly, whatever. Okay, so with qualia, once you actually introduce the concept of qualia for a human, you've also introduced, whether you know it or not, the concept of determinism. Not saying which side you have to be on that, but it introduces that, and people get very upset about determinism. They don't like it. So if you're wondering why everyone isn't a qualiophile, because you're like, even if you don't know Mojo, you have to know that humans are fundamentally different from one another. They have a way to them. That seems obvious to us, but a lot of people can't see that. And some of it is they just aren't maybe very good at reading people in general, but a lot of it is this fear, the fear of determinism. And if you guys know from doing Mojo reading, other things, that if you are scared of the answer, you can't see the answer.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
just like it's so obvious that we are where we are in the cosmos, but you're like, why can't people see that? Fear of insignificance. Fear of death and fear of insignificance actually rattle most people. And then the third one, you can throw it in there, I would say, is determinism. So fear of death, fear of insignificance, and fear of predetermination. That you're just walking out the steps and you're not really choosing anything. So those fears, when people feel those, even in their blinders, they get real twitchy.
Yeah, I noticed like a lot of areas of philosophy that, at least that I've seen, where there's like this highly contested debate. Like for example, free will versus determinism can actually synergize with each other if they're just understood a bit differently.
Yes.
Like in relativism versus determinism, relativism versus absolutism. My bad. Relativism, in a lot of ways, is absolute, right? So if you understand it that way, there's actually no contradiction between relativism and absolutism, because there's basically, at the low level, there are aspects that are relative to each other, but are on the whole actually absolute. Like they're still absolutely a part of the greater natural flow of natural law.
Yeah. And all the absolute.
Like free will is.
Good.
Like free will is basically deterministic, if that makes sense. Like what I mean by that is your free will, like you as the apparatus making decisions, is like you having that free will, you being able to make the decisions you want to, is basically can be synergized with the concept of determinism if you're accounting for the fact that free will actually does exist in that determinism, if that makes sense.
I think infinite mystery is also kind of connected into this conversation as well, because it's sort of like, if there's an infinite amount of complexity and variability and stuff, does that mean that determinism cannot exist? But I would say that there is infinite complexity and infinite mystery out there, but it still all falls within a certain kind of math. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's sort of like a what is that thing that
like if you can imagine like the entire universe is like this giant like algorithm, and like you're like a component within this algorithm that is like, able to make sentient decisions.
Yeah, like a fractal, for example, is you can go zooming in or zooming out, and it has a structure to it and a logic to it, but it is infinite in a way, right? You go in and out, and you could just keep going more and more in or more and more out. So it's just sort of that. That's kind of like an interesting way to think of infinite mystery. Yeah.
It's trippy. All right, so let's see here. You were going to go for it, right, Glenn? You read it through?
I read it through. I'm just going over the beat now. So, but yeah, we're having so much good discussion, so it's kind of hard to keep focused on. But yeah, we got to get back on this. I feel comfortable referring to qualia in terms of like a general idea first, and then referring to it more in terms of like specifically in terms of humanistic philosophy. I think that's
fine.
Kind of like, is that fine? Because I feel like it seems to me like there is a qualia to everything, but then in terms of humanistic philosophy, it tends to be used a lot, and there's a heated focus to understanding qualia in those kinds of terms.
That's fine. That's good.
Oh, the blank slate theory. That's sort of like the tabula rasa kind of idea, right? Or something like that?
And there's also that's big, and also big is, for example, say in certain religions, monotheistic religions, for example, that you are born, basically everyone's born sinful. The main qualia is uniform. So either there is no qualia, like toe blank slate, or everyone has the exact same one. And the only question is,
just real quick, the whole tabula rasa thing in terms of like monotheism, it's kind of dangerous, and it kind of like is not such a great idea, because it's sort of like the baby is born completely without sin in a way, right? and then from then on in, it's sort of just like a downhill spiral. As the person experiences more, they just end up becoming more and more dirty. And so that's kind of like not the correct way to think of it. You are born into this world with natural instincts, with something there already, just like other animals have something to them. But you are you are fresh in the sense that you haven't experienced the world. But
I feel like it is different within a species. But yeah, those are two ones that are quite popular, is that there is no qualia, or that every member of a species or a gender share a single qualia.
And I feel like even like at the most basic level of like genetics, for example, like if you're like everyone's gene like code is different, and we can see that, and we can also see that people seem to be, for example, more gifted in certain ways and less gifted in others, like even without considering Mojo.
Yeah.
So I think like the blank slate thing, I mean, it should be obvious that isn't true, that it isn't actually a blank slate.
Right? In general, I agree with you. I do agree with you, because obviously, we share philosophical views in this. This seems like common sense to us. But to give them a little bit of gray area, which still makes them wrong, but where it gets a little weirder, is I think they would say, I know that those genes make Sally taller or more brunette than someone else, but it doesn't affect her soul, her mental condition, her so on. Those more intangible.
But even then, like, how good are you at, like, okay, so if you're born and you just are naturally more talented at sports because you have better reflexes, or maybe you're better at mathematics because you have better, born with more gifted reasoning. It's
just everything, Ben, is true, and you're just getting deeper into the gray, which is that you can also quantify certain intangibles. Okay, now we're getting to the area that they're like holding up. This is like their phalanx, which is you cannot quantify a soul, you cannot quantify personality, you cannot quantify ambition. So right now,
right.
there's DNA that does show certain DNA sequences, you're going to be more aggressive. And it's why it's such a controversial hot topic, because starting to get into that area, bleed into, you're saying the qualia of their person. Like there's a qualia of their body, and then you're right, Ben, there's also the qualia of certain intangibles that are more mechanical. Like, oh, Ben, I think that you've got a memory processor 3000 as compared to something else. But still, it's intangible, but it's still a bit more robotic. We've not gone into the areas that make you a human, like your compassion DNA.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like right now, that's the fight. They're like, you cannot, say those things.
So that they just keep getting pushed further and further back in this discussion.
And Tom Lair's going to run over their position. We're basically putting all the powers on the board now, because those are basically the intangibles. They're like saying, well, you really can't say that a person gets energy from this or that. Yeah, you actually can now. But those are things they were kind of holding off.
All right, so I think I can do this beat here. All right. So qualia is a term that's basically used to describe anything and everything, as far as like everything has a certain quality to it. In terms of humanistic philosophy, it tends to get used quite a bit, though, in a much more heated, more focused kind of a way, given that human qualia is a subject that is a very, it's a very touchy subject that many people, like they get into it and they have strong opinions about. There's people who believe that there is qualia, and those people are referred to as qualiophiles, then there's those that believe that there isn't any qualia, and those are people that are called qualiophobes. And Paul, their theory, we're obviously qualiophiles. We do believe that there is a qualia in the human being, in the human form, in our expression and everything. But we take it a step further by including the Mojo phenomenon discovery into it as well. And our understanding of qualia is a little bit more, it's a little more nuanced, a little bit more complex, and it's more full, given that we're able to look at the qualia of Mojo and how that comes into play. And that's a way in which we understand qualia, which is much more much more relevant as far as like the human condition goes, as far as just, you know, looking at qualia in terms of like just the, you know, the kind of general way in which I think philosophy tends to approach it from. We're at the same time more general, but we're also able to really focus in on what makes humans what they are and what's the bio hardware that's being used, and like how is that being used and how does that influence the Mojo phenomenon and the humans and how they work.
Cool. Ben, take a shot at that.
Okay, cool.
And it's also observable in any given human individual.
All right, so qualia is a term used in philosophy to describe the various aspects of a person's innate nature. Qualiophiles are people who believe in the concept of qualia and thus believe in innate nature, and qualiophobes are those who don't believe in qualia and thus don't really believe in the distinctions of innate nature, and oftentimes will subscribe to blank slate theory, for example. Pod layer theory is definitely a qualiophile theory, and we expand on the concept of qualia to account for our ever-growing understanding of Mojo phenomenon. The Mojo phenomenon relates to qualia because it describes a person's human design and all about their innate nature in a very inclusive way to what we understand already about how innate nature works.
Yeah, I think qualia, based on philosophy and how people were trying to approach it initially, it's very blind, right? Like psychology, for example, and that sort of stuff. They were trying to just look at the very sort of bare kind of things. Like I'm trying to understand, like, where was I before pod layer? Like that's kind of like the way I think a lot of people were approaching qualia. Just sort of like humans have a personality and they're different from one another. It's even, I don't even know how to imagine it.
Well, I think they were trying to do some good work, but I can tell you probably what you're referencing of why they were having such a challenge with it. And you know, everyone will have these challenges. Pod layer helps a lot because it gives the data to check with, and that is this. Is that if you study the qualia of gemstones way back in the day, you're like, that's pretty straightforward, right? You know, how hard are they, what color are they, how shiny are they? That's pretty technical stuff. It's hard not to look at their qualia and associate it with a certain country because we have a blue flag, or associate that particular stone with something else. And now right now to us that seems silly, but back in the day, if you study this, they did. It's very difficult, and we haven't got to humans yet, but just actually trying to study empirically the qualia of certain gemstones, keeping out projected qualia. We talk about this with typology. Projecting what you think stones are there for, what you think they're for, on their qualia, and then calling it qualia. You projected onto them and called your projection qualia. Humans are really bad at that, and they need data in the face telling them when they're right and when they're wrong. Because otherwise, if it feels good, it'll feel right. And that's just a nice projection. That doesn't mean you actually saw the qualia.
Right, yeah, it's sort of like races and stuff like that. Like this person's race makes them this kind of like a quality of person in a way, right? I can see how many people would get it wrong.
And reading that projection, yeah.
And it's all an attempt that people try to use in order to understand their environment. I mean, they make a lot of mistakes, obviously, but it's an attempt nonetheless. Like, in order to rationalize and understand what's going on and why things happen and why some people are like this or some people are like that, and in order to just come up with like a worldview, which tends to be off, but
it's a balance, and you do need both sides of it. I don't want to actually poo-poo it too much. Next, he's saying, Vi's goal. Like, okay, so I can make sure I respect it.
Vi is cool.
So the way that I would say that is, there is a balance between knowing something because you were told versus you were told by a vetted source versus you saw it yourself. And in life, it's always best to see it yourself if you actually can observe well. But you can't be everywhere all the time. You simply can't process every discovery in human nature. Okay, that's never going to be possible to be physically present to sign off on each one. So you have to actually take some things based on sources, this is whereby Excels, that you trust.
Right.
Someone else actually mapped this area. I don't have to remap it from scratch. Now, the trade-off is, if you notice the map is off, you don't make the terrain fit the map. If you realize the map's a little off, the map's helpful. If it's a little off, you have to rewrite the map. So you constantly do it to rewrite maps, but you can't rewrite every map all the time, or there would never be any progress. So kind of see how Nye and Vi work to do maps that way.
Yeah, you don't break it unless you need to, or you don't fix it unless it's broken, right? That kind of thing.
Except, yes, but I'll add to that, because of a always continuing updating of understanding, it will always need to be broken. So it's not, because Vi will be from like, don't fix it as broken, as in you don't need to fix tradition ever. But no, because the next generation will have new issues, there will automatically be a problem with 1.0. No matter how good 1.0 was, 2.0 will have to fix something from 1.0. So Vi must accept that. And then Nye has to accept that there's 1.0, and that's good for servicing these people, and then there's a crossover to 2.0, and it's a big deal. People shift from 1.0 to 2.0. There's like that lag time, and I was like, okay, fine. You know what I mean? Because not everyone shifts to remodeling as naturally as Nye does. For other people, there's like a conversion period.
Yeah, what I meant by that was sort of like, you don't fix it unless it's broken, but that has to do with perception. Once you realize that it is actually broken, then you need to fix it. But until you make that realization, then there's no need to do anything with it. So you wait for those moments where you realize, oh yeah, this is actually a little bit of a gray area that needs to be worked out. Sort of like when you do your purifications coach, right? You assume that you know that this person is this Mojo, but then you realize, because you have an update, oh no, you realize that this is actually the incorrect Mojo tag, and then you update it. So that's based on perception being like, your update.
That's a good example, because I use both. When I'm doing the purifying, there's areas that I allow to get very nigh liquidy, because I'm like, I may be off here, and I got to allow that to move. But on the other hand, in order to stand up as high as I am, I have to stand on something. So there are thousands of samples, and I'm like, I think like the Vi of these, I think they're good. And I stand on them to massage the ones I think might be off. And so there's a trade-off. Some data I stand on for support, and then some data I have to break down.
So truth is a process. That's what we're learning here. Truth is never,
Because Nye and Vi really kind of specialize in saying they know what it is, and they seem so different than each other. So it's kind of nice to sometimes touch on how they actually are working the same case together. They're friends.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. Like there have been so many up purifications that one would kind of like wonder, like based on how we first initially started, whether or not we were tracking on truth at all. But we were seeing something, right? And then that became even more heightened and more heightened as more and more purifications were made, and now we're able to see the phenomenon even that much more clear.
Well, there's a trade-off there, because
and for a lot of them, like they were like purified, then like we went back to what we had originally too. So that's another thing.
Yeah, it's an ebb and flow kind of thing, right?
It was ebb and flow. Well, there's two things that kind of were constants. One is that I was sure that I was seeing it because there's things that kept repeating, but I wasn't always sure if I was catching it correctly, categorizing it correctly. But I felt that I was touching something always. And that, I think, was always there. As far as the accuracy, I could have been more accurate. This was a decision I made, and I vocalized this many times over the years.
Right. Cover more ground versus being accurate, right?
Yeah, I had to kind of, because I've been doing mass reading for a while. Mass reading kind of uncomfortable. I prefer to kind of like, take a human out, spend some time with them. You know what I mean? Watch all their movies, watch all their videos, and just hang out with, Liev Schreiber for a few months. That would be more what I feel comfortable to do. So I had to kind of do that versus trying to figure the riddle out. And so I came to the conclusion that I needed to get the pieces, kind of like a detective, I need to get the pieces up into that first position on the board and then massage them. So
right. Very Nye over Zai kind of process, right? Abductive reasoning as much as possible, and then deduce as needed as you go. kind of.
Exactly. Because even right now, like I'm worrying because I'm doing a purification cycle right now, but at the same time, I'm like, there's still several thousands of samples minimum I need to kind of get in my head just so I have them in the database. And the sample server program is going to help a lot with just kind of getting the head, getting around the actual problem being worked on.
Right, because you need to have all the paradoxes not be paradoxes anymore first, in a way. Because then once you have the full picture, then a lot of the questions that you're asking, they'll sort of just like clear up on their own, given the more data that you have.
Yeah, more data and the ability to shuffle. In the shuffling, like the Xi bit, the mistakes kind of like wiggle out. The more you come to data from a different angle and this angle and this angle, as you do that shifting, the mistakes kind of like,
I think there's going to be a big difference in the equal mix thing too, like because we so often on these quizzes have like tons of like interpretives and nejez, and that's good. It's just that I feel like with the equal mix, we'll be able to have a more holistic scope of the Mojo phenomenon, getting a reasonable amount with each and every Mojo and gender Mojo.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Or at least like each and every Mojo. I don't think it controls for gender. But.
No, but definitely no. I'm looking forward to it. Like right now, I'm getting into the Olympics and so forth. It's a little more not my thing, but I'm really excited because Mojo's in there that we don't have. Like, we need this. Because if you understand V's eye better, you understand V's eye better, but you actually also understand Ni's eye better. And there's like, you mean because now I understand Zez gatherer better. Our Zez gatherer understanding is more weighted towards Ni's eye right now. Do you know what I mean? It's not a full understanding of it. And so the more it would have both genders and both of the two
Mojos
gatherers, it would actually give that complete picture. So when you say, a Ni's eye is a Zez gatherer, you actually know what that means. So we're the best in the world, but we are still currently working with Aragorn's partial sword. We're trying to get ourselves a complete truth beacon. I'm impatient. All right. Who's up?
It's Ben.
Ben? Is this next beat then? What are natural state physiological cues? How do they manifest?
All right. So I'll just read it off. Physiological cues that come from momentum power usage are natural state physiological cues. This means whatever quality they give to a person's physiological cues, it will be a pervasive signal that influences a person's baseline look, as well as having an innate energetic comfortability.
Okay, so we're a little bit more further into the book here. Natural state physiological cues, that one tiny beat?
Yep.
All right.
All right, so physiological cues that come from momentum power usage are natural state physiological cues. That will end up causing those cues will end up having a pervasive signal on a person's baseline look, and will also have a large degree of comfortability. There'll be a comfortability quality to that cue.
Glenn?
All right, just a moment. All right, so physiological cues that come from the momentum powers are referred to as natural state physiological cues. They give off a pervasive signal based on the fact that they are the momentum powers, and those are the highest ranked, and because of that, it's going to also have a it's going to give them a baseline quality that is, it's going to give them a baseline look, essentially, given that those are the most pervasive signals. And it's also going to be hold on.
I think comfortable is what you're looking for. Baseline and comfortable.
Yeah. Right. So physiological cues that come from the momentum powers are referred to as innate state or physiological cues. They're cues that come from the momentum powers and therefore have a
Natural state, right?
pervasive, natural state physiological cues. Yeah. Because of that, they emanate from the fact that the momentum powers are what cause them to be natural state, and that gives them a more pervasive look as far as like the baseline look that the individual will have, as well as will naturally give a ability to their overall disposition as well.
Cool. All right. Next up, Glenn, what are altered state physiological cues? How do they manifest?
All right. So physiological cues that come from modulation power use are altered state physiological cues. This means whatever quality they give to a person's physiological cues, it will be an intermittent signal that only influences a person's look during active usage, as well as having an innate energetic exertion. All right, so physiological cues that come from the modulation powers are referred to as altered state physiological cues. These cues have more of an intermittent signal that comes into awareness whenever the individual uses those powers in more of an active way, given that modulation powers require more of like an attention and more exertion from the individual, and that's also the way in which it comes across when that person uses those powers.
Cool. Ben?
Okay. All right, so the physiological cues that come from altered state power use are, the physiological cues that come from modulation power use are altered state physiological cues. These physiological cues will give off the quality of, will be very intermittent in usage, and will come on when a person is, will also have an active intermittent, and such that they're actively attempting to access that power, and will also have a more drained quality from really having to heavily invest themselves into that power in order to use it.
Cool. All right, take lead in this next one, Ben. How does the concept of yang-yin relate to the Mojo phenomenon in general? How does it relate to energy fields, and how does it relate to the priorities of the psyche?
It's cool. I feel like we just talked about this on that forum thread.
Right? You guys are getting crazy deep there, though. This is just
Yeah, that's like way deep. That goes way beyond this.
Expands on it, yeah.
This is the starter seed.
Yep.
So you're going to read it?
Oh yeah, I want to read it before I try it. I was just like reading to myself like I was preparing with that. I forgot I haven't actually read it yet. The concept of yang yin is one that is very complex and is addressed in more depth in popular theory as part of the spiritual way of understanding the Mojo phenomenon and its implications. However, there's a key aspect that relates to human design and Mojo reading that should be mentioned for proper context, which is that each possible energetic dichotomy has both a yang and a yin option to it. Some of the yang-yin of human design includes directive is yang and adaptive is yin, objective is yang and subjective is yin, directive is yang and perception is yin, literal is yang and interpretive is yin, logic-based is yang and values-based is yin. Of the worldview powers, Vi is yang and Nai is yin. Of the dynamics mirror powers, Z is yang and Ji is yin. Of the compass bearing powers, Zai is yang and Jai is yin. Of the stimulus register powers, V is yang and Ni is yin.
I think you were talking about, he said discernment or directives of discernment.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I noticed. I was like, directive was said twice, and discernment wasn't said even once. I feel sorry for discernment now.
Did I say directive?
Yeah, I said discernment. It's okay, though. I know what you meant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I was kind of just... Sometimes I do that when I'm reading. I don't even pay attention to what I'm saying. So for the first question, when asks how does yang yin relate to Mojo phenomena in general, I noticed that it first mentions that yang yin is something that will be discussed in more depth in terms of its implications to the Mojo phenomenon. But then it mentions that there is a yang energy field and there's a yin energy field. So does that part answer the first question or the second question? Because I noticed like...
No, it answers the first question. So you can just, this first sentence you kind of skip, that's just context. The second sentence is the first question, which is that in Mojo reading, you're going to be reading dichotomies. And the dichotomies have a yang side of the dichotomy and a yin side. That's the first one.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then you break it down for the energy fields and priorities for the next questions.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, the first one is just sort of like a general understanding of like yang and yin as far as like being a concept, and it's the way in which to understand everything basically.
So just stating that it's a spiritual way of understanding the Mojo phenomenon.
No, that's kind of just for your own context. I would just use the second sentence to answer the first question.
And okay, that makes sense.
Which is that within the scope of Mojo reading, you're going to be reading dichotomies, and those dichotomies don't
right. Okay, so right.
I
Okay,
think,
that makes
yeah,
a lot
I
more
think,
sense.
yeah,
So then you actually go into explaining what it is for the energy fields and then what it is for the priorities. Okay, that makes a lot more sense now.
yeah, that's given the Mojo phenomenon. I think my yang and yin in terms of like universally understanding it, we're talking a little bit about like binary, right? Like ones and zeros, that kind of thing.
Correct. And so we get that later. So the first sentence is kind of just letting them know that this is not all of yang yin. This is just a little teaser to go with this section, but it'll be covered.
Right. Exactly. Related to the Mojo phenomenon, which is getting into the energy fields and getting into the priorities.
Exactly.
Right. I got you.
All right. Oh, Yang Yin.
What's that?
That's very important.
Ben, he's cutting out of you, Glenn. He's cutting out of me.
Yeah, he is. I thought that was me only, but
Ben, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what you're saying is I was cutting off. Okay.
Start again.
I'll just start over. It's cool. So Yang Yin theory and how it relates to the Mojo phenomenon is very complex and will be talked about in more depth. But one of the most critical things about it as it relates to the Mojo phenomenon is that for all of the energy fields, there will be one that is more distinctly more Yang and one that is distinctly more Yin to that Yang. So starting out with the primary energy field, directive is Yang, adaptive is Yin, and then from there, objective is Yang, subjective is Yin, discernment lead is Yang, perception lead is Yin, values based is Yin, logic based is Yang, literal is Yang, and interpretive is Yin. And for the priorities of the psyche, within the
starts with a Q.
within the pilot powers quadrant of the psyche, can I say that?
That's fine.
You have Z, which is Yang, and Ji, which is Yin. The compass bearings, Zhai, which is Yin, and Zai, which is Yang. The worldview map with priority, and then you have Bai, which is Yang, and I, which is Yin. And the stimulus register, you have you have Ni, which is Yin, and V, which is Yang.
Cool. And you're looking for, I think, dynamics mover.
Dynamics mover, yeah. For some reason, I couldn't think of it. I don't know why.
I literally thought that the screen froze for me or something. I was like, because Coach and Ben both look like they're frozen, but you guys are just like deeply in thought. Yeah.
I was like, pilot powers quadrant.
And then I saw Ben's eyes move, and then I was like, no. Right.
Okay, is this you, Glenn?
Yeah, this is me. Okay, so I think I can do this. The concept of Yang and Yin is a concept that is discussed more in the spiritual sections of the Polar theory, as far as like how it relates to the Mojo phenomenon in more the implications kind of manner and more like a broader kind of implications kind of general kind of way. In terms of the human design, though, there is a way in which to apply these principles and understandings to the Mojo phenomenon as far as the human design and trying to understand the dichotomies and the priorities that make up the psyche. So when it comes to the dichotomies, there's 5 of them, and each one is on the ends of each of the dichotomies. One is more Yang and the other one is more Yin. So the first dichotomy is directive and adaptive, which directive is Yang and adaptive is Yin. Objective is Yang and subjective is Yin. Discernment is Yang and perception is Yin. Literal is Yang and then interpretive is Yin. And then logic-based is Yang, and then values-based is Yin. Then when it comes to the priorities, the various quadrants in the psyche, starting from the left front, we have the dynamics mover quadrant, and in there the Z is Yang, and then the Ji is Yin. The left rear quadrant of the psyche, which is the worldview map priority, within that the Vi power is Yang, and then the Nai power is Yin. In the right front quadrant of the psyche, where the stimulus register powers are located, the power of V is Yang, and the power of Ni is Yin. And then in the right rear quadrant of the psyche, the where the stimulus or the compass bearing powers are located. The power of Zai is yang to the yin of Zhai.
Boom. And that takes our time up perfectly. All right, nice. So I will note that. We are now crushing on Mojo reading, which will be L6 for you guys.
Oh yeah, we're nailing it.
All right.
I
So
know
I'm
this is
level.
actually-
I'm
yeah,
level 5 now. All right, cool.
We're at level 5, and Ben will be after tomorrow's catch-up day. So
And then I think Mitchell is also going to be level 5 pretty soon too, right? He's been doing some.
he's been doing some one-on-ones. We got to do a little catch-up with you guys now.
Yeah.
All right.
Soon we'll all be on the same page, and
Yeah, and then
that'll be awesome.
there'll be L10, and then it's just whatever people feel like doing, their own pace and their own subjects. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I noticed this is going faster than I thought it would be. I didn't realize there was like so much stuff that was highlighted or sorry, italics. It was covered
Yeah,
multiple times.
it's kind of eerie how fast we're moving. It's kind of like I was expecting that I was going to take me a little bit more longer to do the level 4, and I was anticipating like a lot of work that needed to be done, but we only had like I think what was it 3 or 4 beats, Coach, and then I just wrapped it all up.
Actually, you actually that's a lot of material, but you guys actually are so fluent with the human design stuff and also the Mojo reading stuff that I think it's just kind of like flying through. We may go a little slower in some other sections, but I think a lot of the stuff that you actually really know kind of the back of your hands is kind of like just getting used to articulating it. She already had it internalized.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Crush. That is called skill. Anything before we take off?
I'm good.
All right.
No, I
Cool.
think we're good.
All right. We'll keep on doing our boss hero thing.
Maybe on Thursday. Oh yeah, one more thing.
Offline?
Oh, we can go off camera
We're
though, if you want.